Hello, everybody. We're finishing up Mort. It's going to be 40 pages. Might be a bit long, but I really love this book. Mort strode through the cat-black corridors of the pyramids, with Isabel hurrying along behind him. The faint glow from his sword illuminated unpleasant things. Offler, the crocodile god, was a cosmetic advert compared to some of the things the people of Sort worshipped. In alcoves along the way... sneezity sneeze. In alcoves along the way were statues of creatures apparently built of all the bits God had left over. "What are they here for?" whispered Isabel. "The Sortian priests say they came alive when the pyramid is sealed and prowl the corridors to protect the body of the king from tomb raiders," said Mort. "What a horrible superstition." "Who said anything about superstition?" said Mort absently. "They really come alive?" "All I'll say is that when the Sortians put a curse on a place, they don't mess about." Mort turned a corner and Isabel lost sight of him for a heart-stopping moment. She scurried through the darkness and condoned into him. He was examining a dog-headed bird. "Ugh," she said. "Doesn't it send shivers up your spine?" "No," said Mort flatly. "Why not?" "Because I am Mort." He turned, and she saw his eyes glow like blue pinpoints. "Stop it!" "I can't." She tried to laugh. It didn't work. "You're not Death," she said. "You're only doing his job." "Death is whoever does Death's job." The shocked pause that followed this was broken by a groan from further along the dark passage. Mort turned on his heel and hurried towards it. "He's right, though, Isabel, even the way he moves." But the fear of the darkness that the light was dragging towards her overcame any other doubts, and she crept after him, around another corner, and into what appeared, in the fitful glow, from the sword to be a cross between a treasury and a very cluttered attic. "What's this place?" she whispered. "I've never seen so much stuff." "The king takes it with him into the next world," said Mort. "He certainly doesn't believe in traveling light. Look, there's a whole boat, and a gold bathtub." "Doubtless he will wish to keep clean when he gets there." "And all those statues." "Those statues, I'm sorry to say, were people. Servants for the king, you understand." Isabel's face set grimly. "The priests gave them poison." There was another groan from the other side of the cluttered room. Mort followed it to its source, stepping awkwardly over rolls of carpet, bunches of dates, crates of crockery, and piles of gems. The king obviously hadn't been able to spend what he was going to leave behind on his journey, so had decided to play safe and take everything. "Only it doesn't always work quickly," Mort added somberly. Isabel clambered gamely after him, and peered over a corno of a young girl sprawled across a pile of rugs. She was wearing gauze trousers, a waistcoat cut from not enough material, and enough bangles to moor a decent-sized ship. There was a green stain around her mouth. "Does it hurt?" said Isabel quietly. "No. They think it takes them to paradise." "Does it?" "Maybe. Who knows?" Mort took the hourglass out of an inner pocket and inspected it by the gleam of the sword. He seemed to be counting to himself, and then, with a sudden movement, tossed the glass over his shoulder and brought the sword down with his other hand. The girl's shade sat up and stretched, with a clink of ghostly jewelry. She caught sight of Mort, and bowed her head. "My lord!" "No one's lord," said Mort. "Now run along to wherever you believe you're going." "I shall be a concubine at the heavenly court of King Zetisfet, who will dwell among the stars forever," she said firmly. "You don't have to be," said Isabel sharply. The girl turned to her, wide-eyed. "Oh, but I must. I've been training for it," she said, as she faded from view. "I've only managed to be a handmaiden up till now." She vanished. Isabel stared with dark disapproval at the space she had occupied. "Well," she said, and, "Did you see what she had on?"
Let's get out of here."
"But it can't be true about the king who's just dwelling among the stars," she grumbled as they found their way out of the crowded room. "There's nothing but empty space up there."
"It's hard to explain," said Mort. "He'll dwell among the stars in his own mind."
"With slaves?"
"It's what they think they are."
"That's not very fair."
"There's no justice," said Mort. "Just us."
They hurried back along the avenues of waiting ghouls and were nearly running when they burst out into the desert night air. Isabel leaned against the rough stonework and panted for breath. Mort wasn't out of breath. He wasn't breathing.
"I will take you wherever you want," he said, "and then I must leave you."
"But I thought you wanted to rescue the princess."
Mort shook his head. "I have no choice. There are no choices."
She ran forward and grabbed his arm as he turned towards the waiting Binky. He removed her hand gently.
"I have finished my apprenticeship."
"It's all in your mind," yelled Isabel. "You're whatever you think you are." She stopped and looked down. The sand around Mort's feet was beginning to whip up in little spurts and twirling dust levels. There was a crackle in the air and a greasy feel. Mort looked uneasy.
"Someone is performing the rite of Ash."
It hit like a hammer, a force from out of the sky that blew the sand into a crater. There was a low buzzing and the smell of hot tin. Mort looked around him in the gale of rushing sand, turning as if in a dream, alone in the calm center of the gale. Lightning flashed in the whirling cloud. Deep inside his own mind, he struggled to break free. But something had him in its grip, and he could not no more resist than a compass needle can ignore the compulsion to point towards the hub. At last, he found what he was searching for. It was a doorway edged in octarine light, leading to a short tunnel. There were figures at the other end, beckoning to him.
"I come,"
he said, and then turned as he heard the sudden noise behind him. 11 stone of young womanhood hit him squarely in the chest, lifting him off the ground. Mort landed with Isabel kneeling on him, holding on grimly to his arms.
"Let me go," he intoned. "I have been summoned."
"No, you idiot! Not you, idiot!" That could work either way. She stared into the blue, pupilless pools of his eyes. It was like looking down a rushing tunnel. Mort arched his back and screamed a curse so ancient and virulent that in the strong magical field it actually took on a form, flapped its leathery wings, and slunk away. A private thunderstorm clashed around the sand dunes. His eyes drew her again. She looked away before she dropped like a stone down a well made of blue light.
"I command you."
Mort's voice could have cut holes in rock. "Father tried that tone on me for years," she said calmly. "Generally, when he wanted me to clean my bedroom. It didn't work then either." Mort screamed another curse, which flopped out of the air and tried to bury itself in the sand.
"The pain."
"It's all in your head," she said, bracing herself against the force that wanted to drag them towards that flickering doorway. "You're not death. You're just Mort. You're whatever I think you are." In the center of the blurred blueness of his eyes were 2 tiny brown dots, rising at the speed of sight. The storm around them rose and wailed. Mort screamed. The rite of Ashkente, quite simply, summons and binds death. Students in the occult will be aware that it can be performed with a simple incantation, 3 small bits of wood, and 4 cc's of mouse blood, but no wizard worth his pointy hat would dream of doing anything so unimpressive. They knew in their hearts that if a spell didn't involve a big yellow candles, lots of rare incense, circles drawn on the floor with 8 different colors of chalk, and a few cauldrons around the place, then it simply wasn't worth contemplating. The 8 wizards at their stations on the points of the great ceremonial octagram swayed and chanted, their arms held out sideways so they were just touching the fingertips of the mages on either side. But something was going wrong. True, a mist had formed at the very center of the living octagram, but it was writhing and turning in on itself, refusing to focus. "More power!" shouted Albert. Give it more power! A figure appeared momentarily in the smoke, black-robed and holding a glittering sword. Albert swore as he caught a glimpse of the pale face under the crowd. It wasn't pale enough. "No!" Albert yelled, ducking into the octagram and flailing the flickering shape with his hands. "Not you! Not you!" And in a faraway sort, Isabel forgot she was a lady, bunched her fist, narrowed her eyes, and caught Mort squarely on the jaw. The world around her exploded. In the kitchen of Harga's House of Ribs, the frying pan crashed to the floor, sending the cat scurrying out of the door. In the great hall of the unseen university, everything happened at once. Asterisk. This is not precisely true. It is generally agreed by philosophers that the shortest time in which everything can happen at once is 1,000 billion years. The tremendous force the wizards had been exerting on the Shadow Realm suddenly had one focus. Like a reluctant cork from a bottle, like a dollop of fiery ketchup from the upturned sauce bottle of infinity, Death landed in the octagram and swore. Albert realized just too late that he was inside the charmed ring and made a dive for the edge, but skeletal fingers caught him by the hem of his robe. The wizards, such of them who were still on their feet and conscious, were rather surprised to see that Death was wearing an apron and holding a small kitten. Why did you have
To spoil it all.
Spoil it? Have you seen what the lad has done? Snapped Albert, still trying to reach the edge of the ring. Death raised his skull and sniffed the air. The sound cut through all the other noises in the hall and forced them into silence. It was the kind of noise that is heard on the twilight edges of dreams, the sort that you wake from in a cold sweat of mortal horror. It was the snuffling under the door of dread. It was like the snuffling of a hedgehog, but if so, then it was the kind of hedgehog that crashes out of the verges of flattened lorries. It was the kind of noise you wouldn't want to hear twice. You wouldn't want to hear it once. Death straightened up slowly.
Is this how he repays my kindness? To steal my daughter, insult my servants, and risk the fabric of reality on a personal whim? Oh, foolish, foolish, I have been foolish too long.
Master, if you would just be so good as to let go of my robe, began Albert, and the wizard noticed a bleeding edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. Death ignored him. He snapped his fingers like a castanet, and the apron around his waist exploded into brief flames. The kitten, however, he put down very carefully and gently pushed away with his foot.
Did I not give him the greatest opportunity?
Exactly, Master. And now, if you could see your way clear...
Skills, a career structure, prospects, a job for life?
Indeed. And if you would but let go... The change in Albert's voice was complete. The trumpets of command had become the piccolos of supplication. He sounded terrified, in fact, but he managed to catch Rincewind's eye and hiss. My staff! My staff! Throw me my staff! While he is in his circle, he is not invincible. Let me have my staff and I can break free, Rincewind said. Pardon?
Oh, mine is the fault for giving in to these weaknesses of what, for want of a better word, I shall call the flesh.
My staff, you idiot! My staff! Gibbered Albert. Sorry?
Well done, my servant, for calling me to my senses, said Death. Let us lose no time.
My staff! There was an implosion and an inrush of air. The candle flames stretched out like limes of fire for a moment, and then went out. Some time passed. Then the bursar's voice from somewhere near the floor said, That was rather uncommon, Rincewind, losing his staff like that. Remind me to discipline you severely one of these days. Anyone got a light? I don't know what happened to it. I just leaned it against the pillar here, and now it's... Ook. Oh, said Rincewind. Extra banana ration, that ape, said the bursar levelly. A match flared, and someone managed to get a candle alight. Wizards started to pick themselves off the floor. Well, that was a lesson to all of us, the bursar continued, brushing dust and candle wax off his robe. He looked up, expecting to see the statue of Alberto Malak back on its pedestal. Clearly, even statues have feelings, he said. I myself recall when I was but a first-year student writing my name on his never mind. The point is, I propose here and now we replace the statue. Dead silence greeted this suggestion.
with, say, an exact likeness cast in gold, suitably embellished with jewels as befit our great founder," he went on brightly. "And to make sure no student deface it in any way, I suggest that we then erect it in the deepest cellar," he continued. "And then lock the door," he added. Several wizards began to cheer up. "And throw away the key?" said Rincewind. "And weld the door," the bursar said. He had just remembered about the mended drum. He thought for a while and remembered about the physical fitness regime as well. "And then brick up the doorway," he said. There was a round of applause. "And throw away the bricklayer," chortled Rincewind, who felt he was getting the hang of this. The bursar scowled at him. "No need to get carried away," he said. Oh, they hated that guy so much. In the silence, a larger and usual sand dune humped up awkwardly, and then fell away to reveal Binky, blowing the sand out of his nostrils and shaking his mane. Mort opened his eyes. There should be a word for that brief period just after waking, when the mind is full of warm pink nothing. You lie there entirely empty of thought, except for a growing suspicion that heading towards you like a sock full of damp sand and a nocturnal alleyway are all the recollections you'd rather do without, and which amount to the fact that the only mitigating factor in your horrible future is the certainty that it will be quite short. Mort sat up and put his hands on top of his head to stop it unscrewing. The sand beside him heaved, and Isabel pushed herself into a sitting position. Her hair was full of sand, and her face was grimy with pyramid dust. Some of her hair had frizzled at the tips. She stared listlessly at him. "Did you hit me?" he said, gently testing his jaw. "Yes." "Ow!" He looked at the sky as though it could remind him about things. He had to be somewhere soon, he recalled. Then he remembered something else. "Thank you," he said. "Any time, I'll show you." Isabel made it to her feet and tried to brush the dirt and cobwebs off her dress. Yes. "Are we going to rescue this princess of yours?" she said differently. She said diffidently. Diffidently. That's a $3 word. Diffidently. Mort's own personal internal reality caught up with him. He shot to his feet with a strangled cry, watched blue fireworks explode in front of his eyes, and collapsed again. Isabel caught him under the shoulders and hauled him back onto his feet. "Let's get down to the river," she said. "I think we could all do with a drink." "What happened to me?" She shrugged as best as she could while supporting his weight. "Someone used the rite of Ashkente. Father hates it. He says they always summon him in inconvenient movements. The part of you that was death went, and you stayed behind, I think. At least you've got your own voice back." "What time is it? What time did you say the priests close up at the pyramids?" Mort squinted through streaming eyes back towards the tomb of the king. Sure enough, torch-lit fingers were working on the door. Soon, according to the legend, the guardians would come to life and begin their endless patrol. He knew they would. He remembered the knowledge. He remembered his mind feeling as cold as ice and limitless as the night sky. He remembered being summoned into reluctant existence at the moment the first creature lived, and the certain knowledge that he would outlive life until the last being in the universe passed to its reward, when it would then be his job, figuratively speaking, to put the chairs on the table and turn all the lights off. He remembered the loneliness. "Don't leave me," he said urgently. "I'm here," she said, "for as long as you need me." "It's midnight," he said dully, sinking down by the sort and lowering his aching head to the water. Beside him, there was a noise like a bath emptying as Binky also took a drink. "Does that mean we're too late?" "Yes." "I'm sorry. I wish there was something I could do." "There isn't?" "At least you'll keep your promise to Albert." "Yes," said Mort bitterly. "At least I did that." Nearly all the way from one side of the disc to the other, there should be a word for the microscopic spark of hope that you dare not entertain in case the mere act of acknowledging it will cause it to vanish, like trying to look at the photon. You could only sidle up to it, looking past it, walking past it, waiting for it to get big enough to face the world. He raised his dripping head and looked towards the sunset horizon, trying to remember the big model of the disk in Death's study, without actually letting the universe know what he was entertaining. At times like this, it could seem that eventuality is so finely balanced that merely thinking too loud can spoil everything. He oriented himself by the thin streamers of hub light dancing against the stars, and made an inspired guess that Stolat was...
Over there.
Midnight, he said aloud.
Gone midnight now, said Isabel. Mort stood up, trying not to let the delight radiate out from him like a beacon, and grabbed Mickey's harness.
Come on, he said. We haven't got much time.
What are you talking about? Mort reached down to swing her up behind him. It was a nice idea, but merely meant that he nearly pulled himself out of the saddle. She pushed him back gently and climbed up by herself. Binky skittered sideways, sensing Mort's feverish excitement, and snorted and pawed at the sand. I said, what are you talking about? Mort turned the horse to face the distant glow of the sunset.
The speed of night, he said.
Cutwell poked his head over the palace battlements and groaned. The interface was only a street away, clearly invisible in the octarine, and he didn't have to imagine the sizzling. He could hear it, a nasty sawtooth buzz as random particles of possibility hit the interface and gave up their energy as noise. As it ground its way up the street, the pearly wall swallowed the bunting, the torches, and the waiting crowds, leaving only dark streets. Somewhere out there, Cutwell thought. I'm fast asleep in my bed, and none of this has happened. Lucky me. He ducked down, skidded down the ladder to the cobbles, and legged it back to the main hall, with the skirts of his robe flapping around his ankles. He slipped in through the small postern and the great door and ordered the... I'm reading that really wrong. He slipped in through the small postern in the great door and ordered the guards to lock it, then grabbed his skirts again and pounded along a side passage so that the guests wouldn't notice him. The hall was lit with thousands of candles and crowded with Stow-Plain dignitaries, nearly all of them slightly unsure why they were there. And of course, there was the elephant. It was the elephant that had convinced Cutwell that he had gone off the rails of sanity, but it seemed like a good idea a few hours ago, when his exasperation at the high priest's poor eyesight had run into the recollection that a lumber mill on the edge of town possessed said beast for the purpose of heavy haulage. It was elderly, arthritic, and had an uncertain temper. But it had one important advantage as a sacrificial victim. The high priest should be able to see it. Half a dozen guards were gingerly trying to restrain the creature, in whose slow brain the realization had dawned that it should be in its familiar stable, with plenty of hay and water and time to dream of the hot days on the great khaki plains of Clatch. It was getting restless. It will shortly become apparent that another reason for its growing friskiness is the fact that in the pre-ceremony confusion, its trunk found the ceremonial chalice containing a gallon of strong wine and drained the lot. Strange, hot ideas are beginning to bubble in front of its crusted eyes, of uprooted baobabs, mating fights with other bulls, glorious stampedes through native villages, and other half-remembered pleasures. Soon, it will start to see pink people. Gotta love that. Fortunately, this was unknown to Cutwell, who caught the eye of the high priest's assistant, a forward-looking young man who had the foresight to provide himself with a long rubber apron and waiters, and signaled that the ceremony should begin. He darted back into the priest's robing room and struggled into the special ceremonial robe the palace seamstress had made up for him, digging deep into her work-basket for scraps of lace, sequins, and gold threads to produce a garment of such dazzling tastelessness that even the Arch-Chancellor of Unseen University wouldn't have been ashamed to wear it. Cutwell allowed himself 5 seconds to admire himself in the mirror before ramming the pointy hat on his head and running back to the door, stopping just in time to emerge at a sedate place as it befitted a person of substance. He searched the high priest of Kelly, He reached the high priestess Kelly, started her advance up the central aisle, flanked by maidservants who fussed over her like tugs around a liner. Despite the drawbacks of her hereditary dress, Cutwell thought she looked beautiful. There was something about her that made him... He gritted his teeth and tried to concentrate on the security arrangements. He had put guards at various vantage points in the hall in case the Duke of Stow-O'Hellet tried any last-minute rearrangements of the royal succession, and reminded himself to keep a special eye on the Duke himself, who was sitting in the front row of seats, with a strange, quiet smile on his face. The Duke caught Cutwell's eye, and the wizard hastily looked away. The high priest held up his hands for silence. Cutwell sidled towards him as the old man turns toward the hood, and in a cracked voice began the invocation of the gods. Cutwell let his eyes slip back towards the Duke. "Hear me, O gods!" Was Stow-Hellet looking up into the bat-hunted darkness of the rafters? Hear me, O blind isle of the 100 eyes. Hear me, O great offler of the bird-haunted mouth. Hear me, O merciful fate. Hear me, O cold, destiny. Hear me, O seven-handed sec. Hear me, O hokey of the woods. Hear me, O... With dull honor, Cutwell realized that the daft old fool, against all instruction, was going to mention the whole lot. There were more than 900 known gods in the disc, and research theologians were discovering more every year. It could take hours. The congregation was already beginning to shuffle its feet. Kelly was standing in front of the altar with a look of fury on her face. Cutwell nudged the high priest in the ribs, which had no noticeable effect, and then waggled his eyebrows ferociously at the young acolyte. "Stop him!"
Stop him, he hissed. We haven't got time. The gods would be displeased. Not as displeased as me, and I'm here.
The acolyte looked at Cutwell's expression for a moment, and decided that he'd better explain to the gods later. He tapped the high priest on the shoulder and whispered something in his ear. "Oh, Steck-Helget, god of isolated Carlbriars, hear me, oh, hello, what? Murmur. This is, very irregular. Very well. We shall go straight to the, recitation of the lineage." Murmur. The high priest scowled at Cutwell, or at least where he believed Cutwell to be.
"All right, prepare the incense and fragrances for the striving of the fourfold path." Murmur.
The high priest's face darkened.
"I suppose, a short prayer, is totally out of the question," he asked acidly.
If some people don't get a move on," said Kelly demurely, "this is going to be trouble."
Murmur. "I don't know, I'm sure," said the high priest. "People might as well not bother with a religious ceremony at all. Fetch the bloody elephant, then."
The acolyte gave Cutwell a frantic look and waved at the guards. As they urged their gently swaying charge forward, with shouts and pointed sticks, the young priest sidled towards Cutwell and pushed something into his hand. He looked down. It was a waterproof hat.
"Is this necessary?"
He's very devout," said the acolyte. "We may need a snorkel."
The elephant reached the altar and was forced without too much difficulty to kneel. It hiccuped.
"Well, where is it then?" snapped the high priest. "Let's get this farce over with."
Murmur, went the acolyte. The high priest listened, nodded gravely, picked up his white-handed sacrificial knife, and raised it double-handed over his head. The whole hall watched, holding its breath. Then he lowered it again.
"Where? In front of me?" Murmur. "I certainly don't need your help, my lad. I've been sacrificing man and boy and women and animals for 70 years. And when I can't use the knife, you can put me to bed with a shovel."
For those of you who can't remember, he's blind. And he brought the blade back down in a wide sweep, which by sheer luck gave the elephant a mild flesh wound on the trunk. The creature awoke from its pleasant reflective stupor and squealed. The acolyte turned in horror to look at two tiny bloodshot eyes squinting down the length of an enraged trunk, and cleared the altar into one standing jump. The elephant was enraged. Vague, confusing recollections flooded its aching head of fires, and shouts, and men with nets and cages and spears, and too many years hauling heavy tree trunks. It brought its trunk down across the altar stone, and somewhat to its own surprise smashed it in twain, levered the two parts in the air with its tusk, trying unsuccessfully to uproot a stone pillar, and then, feeling the sudden need for a breath of fresh air, started to charge arthritically down the length of the hall. Elephants do get arthritis, by the way. It hit the door at a dead run, its blood loud with the call of the herd and fizzing with alcohol, and took it off at the hinges. Still wearing the frame of its shoulders, it careened across the courtyard, smashed the outer gates, burped, thundered through the sleeping city, and was still slowly accelerated when it sniffled the distant dark continent of Clash on the night breeze, and tall raised followed the ancient call of home. Back in the hall, there was dust and shouts and confusion. Cutwell pushed his hat out of his eyes and got to his hands and knees. "Thank you," said Kelly, who had been lying underneath him. "And why did you jump on top of me?"
"My first instinct was to protect you, Your Majesty."
"Yes, instinct it may have been, but—" She started to say that maybe the elephant would have been weighed less, but the sight of his big, serious, and rather flushed face stopped her. "We will talk about this later," she said, sitting up and brushing the dust off her. "In the meantime, I think we will dispense with the sacrifice. I am not your majesty yet, just your highness. And now, if someone will fetch the crown—" There was the snick of a safety catch behind them.
"The wizard will put his hand up."
"The wizard will put his hands where I can see them," said the Duke. Cutwell stood up slowly and turned around. The Duke was backed by half a dozen large, serious men, the type of men whose only function in life is to loom behind people like the Duke. They had a dozen large, serious crossbows, whose main purpose was to appear to be on the point of going off. The princess sprang to her feet and launched herself at her uncle, but Cutwell grabbed her. "No," he said quietly. "This isn't the kind of—" Oh. But Cutwell— No, he said quietly. "This isn't the kind of man who ties you up in a cellar with just enough time for the mice to eat your ropes before the floodwaters rise. This is the kind of man who just kills you here and now." The Duke bowed. "I think it can be truly said that the gods have spoken," he said. "Clearly, the princess was tragically crushed by the rogue elephant. The people will be upset. I will personally decree a week of mourning." "You can't do all that. All the guests have seen—" the princess began, nearly in tears. Cutwell shook his head. He could see the guards moving through the crowds of bewildered guests. "They haven't," he said. "You'll be amazed at what they haven't seen, especially when they learn that being tragically crushed to death by a rogue elephant can be catching. You can even die of it in bed." The Duke laughed pleasantly. You really are quite intelligent for a wizard," he said. "Now I am merely proposing banishment." "You see, you won't get away with this," said Cutwell. He thought for a bit and added, "Well, you probably will get away with it, but you'll feel bad about it on your deathbed, and you'll wish—" He stopped talking. His jaw dropped. The Duke half turned to follow his gaze. "Well, wizard, what have you seen?" That's the end of the Duke's voice. "Well, wizard, what have you seen?" "You won't get away with it," said Cutwell hysterically. "You won't even be here. This is going to have never happened, do you realize?" "Watch his hands," said the Duke. "If he even moves his fingers, shoot them." He looked around again, puzzled. The wizard had sounded genuine. Of course, it was said wizards could see things that weren't there. It doesn't even matter if you kill me," Cutwell babbled. "Because tomorrow I'll wake up in my own bed, and this won't have happened anyway. It's come through the wall." I don't know why I picked that voice for Cutwell. He's supposed to be just 20 years old. Night rolled onwards across the disk. It was always there, of course, lurking in shadows and holes and cellars, but as the slow light of death drifted after the sun, the pools and lakes of night spread out, met and merged. Light on the Discworld moves slowly because of the vast magical field. Light on the Discworld isn't like light elsewhere. It's grown up a bit. It's been around. It doesn't feel the need to rush everywhere. It knows that however fast it goes, darkness always gets there first. So it takes it easy. Midnight glided across the landscape like a velvet bat, and faster than midnight, a tiny spark against the dark arc world of the disk, Binky pounded after it. Flames roared back from his hooves. Muscles moved under his glistening skin like snakes in oil. They moved in silence. Isabel took one arm from around Mort's waist and watched sparks glitter around her fingers in all 8 colors of the rainbow. Little crackling circles of light flowed down her arm and flushed off the tips of her hair. Mort took the horse down lower, leaving a boiling wake of cloud that extended for miles behind them. Now I know I'm going mad, he muttered. "Why?" "I just saw an elephant down there. Well, boy, look, you can see Stolat up ahead." Isabel peered over his shoulder and the distant gleam of light. "How far have we got?" she said nervously. "I don't know. A few minutes, perhaps." "Mort, I hadn't asked you before." "Well?" "What are you going to do when we get there?" "I don't know," he said. I was sort of hoping something would suggest itself at the time. Has it? No, but it isn't time yet. Albert's spell might help, and I... The dome of reality squatted over the palace like a collapsing jellyfish. Mort's voice trailed into horrified silence. Then Isabel said, "Well, I think it's nearly time. What are we going to do?"
"Hold tight."
Binky glided through the smashed gates of the outer courtyard, slid across the cobbles in a trail of sparks, and leapt through the ravaged doorway of the hall. The pearly wall of the interface loomed up and passed like a shock of cold spray. Mort had a confused vision of Kelly and Cutwell and a group of large men diving for their lives. He recognized the features of the Duke and drew his sword, vaulting from the saddle as soon as the steaming horse skidded to a halt.
Don't you lay a finger on her," he screamed. "I'll have your head off."
"This is certainly most impressive," said the Duke, drawing his own sword. "And also very foolish.
He stopped. His eyes glazed over. He toppled forward. Cutwell put down the big silver candlestick he'd wielded and gave Mort an apologetic smile. Mort turned towards the guards, the blue flame of Death's sword humming through the air.
"Anyone else want some?"
he snarled. They backed away, and then turned and ran. As they passed through the interface, they vanished. There were no guests outside either. In the real reality, the hall was dark and empty. The four of them were left in a hemisphere that was rapidly growing smaller. Mort sidled over to Cutwell.
"Any ideas?" he said. "I've got a magic spell here somewhere." "Forget it. If I try any magic in here now, it'll blow our heads off. This little reality is too small to contain it."
Mort sagged against the remains of the altar. He felt empty, drained. For a moment, he watched the sizzling wall of the interface drifting nearer. He'd survive it, he hoped, and so would Isabel. Cutwell wouldn't, but a Cutwell would. Only Kelly... "Am I going to be crowned or not?" she said icily. "I've got to die a queen. It'd be terribly dead and common." Mort gave her an unfocused look, trying to remember what on earth she was talking about. Isabel finished a round in the wreckage behind the altar and came up with a rather battered gold circlet set with small diamonds. "Is this it?" she said. "That's the crown," said Kelly, nearly in tears. "But there's no priest or anything." Mort sighed deeply.
"Cutwell, is this our own reality we can rearrange in the way we want? If this is our own reality, we can rearrange it the way we want, can't we?" "What had you in mind?" "You're now a priest. Name your own god."
Cutwell curtsied and took the crown from Isabel. "You're all making fun of me," snapped Kelly.
"Sorry,"
said Mort wearily.
"It's been a rather long day." "I hope I can do this right," said Cutwell solemnly. "I've never crowned anyone before."
"I've never been crowned before."
"Good," said Cutwell soothingly. "We can learn together."
He started to murmur some impressive words in a strange tongue. It was in fact a simple spell for ridding of the clothing of fleas. But he thought, what the hell? And then he thought, gosh, in this reality I'm the most powerful wizard there ever was. That'd be something to tell my He gritted his teeth. There'd be some rules changed in this reality, that's for sure. Oh, wizards on the disc aren't allowed to have sex. Yeah. Isabel sat down beside Mort and slipped her hands in his. "Well," she said quietly, "this is the time. Has anything suggested itself?"
"No."
The interface was more than halfway down the hall, slowly, slightly, as it relentlessly ground down the pressure of the intruding reality. Something wet and warm blew in Mort's ear. He reached up and touched Binky's muzzle.
"Dear old horse," he said. "And I'm right out of sugar lumps. You'll have to find your way home by yourself."
His hand stopped in mid-pat.
"We can all go home," he said.
"I don't think Father would like that very much," said Isabel, but Mort ignored her.
"Cutwell!"
"Yes?"
"We're leaving. Are you coming? You'll still exist when the interface closes."
Part of me will," said
Part of me will," said the wizard.
"That's what I meant," said Mort, swinging himself onto Binky's back.
"But speaking as the part that won't, I'd like to join you."
Oh, so that was Cutwell saying that.
"But speaking as the part that won't, I'd like to join you," said Cutwell quickly.
"I intend to stay here to die in my own kingdom," said Kelly.
"What you intend doesn't signify," said Mort.
"I've come all the way across the desk to rescue you. Do you see? And you're going to be rescued." But I'm the Queen, said Kelly. Uncertainty welled up in her eyes, and she spun around to Cutwell, who lowered his candlestick guiltily. I heard you say the words. I am Queen, aren't I?
Oh, yes,
said Cutwell instantly, and then, because a wizard's word is supposed to be harder than cast iron, added virtuously,
and totally free from infestation, too.
Cutwell, snapped Mort. The wizard nodded, caught Kelly around the waist, and bodily hoisted her onto Binky's back. Hoisting his skirt around his waist, he clambered up behind Mort, and reached down and swung Isabel up behind him. The horse jigged across the floor, complaining about the overloading, but Mort turned him towards the broken doorway and urged him forward. The interface followed them as they clattered down the hall and into the courtyard, rising slowly. Its pearly fog was only yards away, tightening by inches.
Excuse me,
said Cutwell to Isabel, raising his hat.
Igneous Cutwell, wizard first grade, UU, former royal recognizer, and soon to be beheaded, probably. Would you happen to know where we are going?
To my father's country, said Isabel, above the wind of their passage.
Have I ever met him?
I don't think so. You'd have remembered. The top of the palace wall scraped Binky's hooves as, muscles straining, he sought for more height. Cutwell leaned backward again, holding on to his hat.
Who is this gentleman of which we speak?
He yelled. Death, said Isabel.
Not...
Yes.
Oh.
Cutwell peered down at the distant rooftops and gave her a lopsided smile.
Would it save time if I just jumped off now?
He's quite nice if you got to know him, said Isabel defensively.
Is he? Do you think we'll get the chance?
Hold on, said Mort. We should be going across just about. A hole full of blackness rushed out of the sky and caught them. The interface bobbed uncertainly, empty as a pauper's pocket, and carried on, shrinking. We're in the final stretch now. The front door opened. Isabel poked her head out. There's no one at home, she said. You'd better come in. The other three filed into the hallway. Cutwell coincidentally wiped his feet. It's a bit small, said Kelly critically.
It's a lot bigger and sad,
said Mort, and turned to Isabel.
Have you looked everywhere?
I can't even find Albert, she said. I can't remember him ever not being here. She coughed, remembering her duties as hostess. Would anyone like a drink? She said. Kelly ignored her. I was expecting a castle at least, she said. Big and black with great dark towers. Not an umbrella stand.
It has got a scythe in it,
Cutwell pointed out. Let's all go into the study and sit down, and I'm sure we'll all feel better, said Isabel hurriedly, and pushed to open the black oak baize door. Cutwell and Kelly stepped through, bickering. Isabel took Mort's arm. What are we going to do now? She said. Father will be very angry if he finds them here.
I'll think of something, said Mort. I'll rewrite the autobiographies or something.
He smiled weakly. Don't worry, I'll think of something. The door slammed behind him. Mort turned to look into Albert's grinning face. The big leather armchair behind the desk revolved slowly. Death looked at Mort over steepled fingers. When he was quite certain he had their full, horrified attention, he said,
You had better start now.
He stood up, appearing to grow larger as the room darkened.
Don't bother to apologize, he added.
Kelly buried her head in Cutwell's ample chest.
I am back, and I am angry.
Master, Mort began.
Shut up,
said Death. He beckoned Kelly with a calcareous forefinger. She turned to look at him, her body not daring to disobey. Death reached out and touched her chin. Mort's hand went to his sword.
Is this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burned the topless towers of Pseudopolis? Wondered Death.
Kelly stared, hypnotized at the red pit pinpoints miles deep in those dark sockets.
Excuse me,
said Cutwell, holding his hat respectively, Mexican fashion. Mexican fashion? Old book.
Well,
said Death, distracted.
It isn't, sir. You must be thinking of another face.
What is your name?
Cutwell, sir. I'm a wizard, sir. I'm a wizard, sir,
Death sneered.
Be silent, wizard.
Sir, Cutwell stepped back. Death turned to Isabel.
Daughter, explain yourself. Why did you aid this fool?
Isabel curtsied nervously. I love him, father. I think.
You do?
Said Mort, astonished.
You never said.
There didn't seem to be time, said Isabel. Father, he didn't mean...
Be silent.
Isabel dropped her gaze. Yes, father. Death stalked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of Mort. He stared at him for a long time. Then in one blurred movement, his hand struck Mort across the face, knocking him off his feet.
I invite you into my home, he said. I train you, I feed you, I clothe you. I give you opportunities you could not dream of, and thus you repay me. You seduce my daughter from me, you neglect the duty, you make ripples in reality that will take a century to heal. Your ill-timed actions have doomed your comrades to oblivion. The gods will demand nothing less. All in all, boy, not a good start to your first job.
Mort struggled into a sitting position, holding his cheek. It burned coldly, like common ice.
Mort, he said. It speaks. What does it say?
You can let them go, said Mort. They just got involved. Wasn't their fault. You can rearrange this so.
Why should I do that? They belong to me now.
I'll fight you for them, said Mort.
Very noble. Mortals fight me all the time. You are dismissed.
Mort got to his feet. He remembered what being Death had been like. He caught hold of the feeling, let it surface.
Now, he said. Ah, you challenge me as between equals then.
Mort swallowed, but at least the way was clear now. When you step off a cliff, your life takes a very definite direction.
If necessary, he said. And if I win... If you win, you will be in a position to do whatever you please, said Death. Follow me.
He stalked past Mort and out into the hall. The other four looked at Mort.
Are you sure you know what you're doing? Said Cutwell. No.
You can't beat the master, said Albert. He sighed.
Take it from me.
What'll happen if you lose?
I won't lose, said Mort. That's the trouble.
Father wants him to win, said Isabel bitterly.
You mean he'll let Mort win? Said Cutwell.
Oh, no.
He won't let him win.
Oh, no. He won't let him win. He just wants him to win. Mort nodded. As they followed Death's dark shape, he reflected on an endless future, serving whatever mysterious purpose the Creator had in mind, living outside time. He couldn't blame Death for wanting to quit the job. Death had said the bones were not compulsory, but perhaps that wouldn't matter. Would eternity feel like a long time, or were all lives, from a personal viewpoint, entirely the same length?
Ha! Said a voice in his head. Remember me? I'm you. I got you into this.
Thanks, he said bitterly. The others glanced at him. You could come through this, the voice said. You've got a big advantage. You've been him, and he's never been you. Death swept through the hall and into the long room, the candles obediently flicking into flame as he entered.
Albert.
Master.
Fetch the glasses.
Master. Cutwell grabbed the old man's arm. You're a wizard, he hissed. You don't have to do what he says.
How old are you, lad? Said Albert kindly.
20.
When you're my age, you'll see your choices differently.
He turned to Mort.
Sorry.
Mort drew his sword, its blade almost invisible in the light of the candles. Death turned and stood facing him, a thin silhouette against a towering rack of hourglasses. He held out his arms. The scythe appeared in them with a tiny thunderclap. Albert came back down one of the glass-lined alleys with 2 hourglasses, and set them down wordlessly on a ledge on one of the pillars. One was several times the size of the ordinary glasses, black, thin, and decorated with a complicated skull and bones motif. That wasn't the most unpleasant thing about it. Mort groaned inwardly. He couldn't see any sand in there. The smaller glass, beside it, was quite plain and unadorned. Mort reached for it. "May I?" he said.
"Be my guest."
The name Mort was engraved on the top bulb. He held it up to the light, noting without any real surprise that there was hardly any sand left. When he held it to his ear, he thought he could hear, even above the ever-present roar of the millions of lifetimers around him, the sound of his own life pouring away. He put it down very carefully. Death turned to Cutwell.
Mr. Wizard, sir, you will be good enough to give us a count of 3.
Cutwell nodded glumly. "Are you sure this couldn't all be sorted out by getting around a table?" he began. No. Mort and Death circled one another warily, their reflections flickering across the banks of hourglasses. 1, said Cutwell. Death spun his scythe menacingly. 2. The blades met in midair with a noise like a cat sliding down a pane of glass. "They both cheated," said Kelly. Isabel noted. "Of course," she said. Mort jumped back, bringing the sword round in a too slow arc that Death easily deflected, turning the parry into a wicked low sweep that Mort avoided only by a clumsy standing jump. Although the scythe isn't preeminent among weapons of war, anyone who has been on the wrong end of, say, a peasant's revolt will know that in a skilled hands it is fearsome. Once its owner gets its weaving and spinning, no one, including the wielder, is quite uncertain where the blade is now and where it will be next. Death advanced, grinning. Mort ducked a cut at head height and dived sideways, hearing a tinkle behind him as the tip of the scythe caught a glass on the nearest shelf. In a dark alley in Moorpork, a night soil entrepreneur clutched at his chest and pitched forward over his cart. Mort rolled and came up swinging the sword double-handed over his head, feeling a twang of dark exhilaration as Death darted backwards across the checkered tiles. The wild swing cut through a shelf. One after another, its burden of glasses started to slide towards the floor. Mort was dimly aware of Isabel scurrying past him to catch them one by one. Across the disc, 4 people miraculously escaped death by falling. And then he ran forward, pressing home his advantage. Death's hands moved in a blur as he blocked every chop and thrust, and then changed grip on the scythe and brought the blade swinging up in an arc that Mort sidestepped, awkwardly nicking the frame of an hourglass with the hilt of his sword and sending it flying across the room. In the Ram-Top Mountains, a Tharga herder, searching by lamplight in the high meadows for a lost cow, missed his footing and plunged over a 1,000-foot drop. Cutwell dived forward and caught the tumbling glass in one desperately outstretched hand, hit the floor, and slid along the stomach. A gnarled sycamore mysteriously loomed under the screaming herder and broke his fall, removing his major problems, death, the judgment of his gods, the uncertainty of paradise, and so on, and replacing them with the comparatively simple one of climbing back up about 100 feet of sheer icy cliff in pitch darkness. There was a pause as the combatants backed away from each other and circled again, looking for an opening. This is all rather exciting. "Surely there's something we can do," said Kelly. Mort will lose either way." Oh my god. Let's see what's on here. What are all these alerts? "Mort will lose either way," said Isabel, shaking her head. Cutwell shook the silver candlestick out of the baggy sleeve and tossed it thoughtfully from hand to hand. Death hefted the scythe, threateningly, incidentally, smashing an hourglass by his shoulder. In best Pelagic, the Emperor's chief torturer slumped backwards into his own acid pit, and took another swing which Mort dodged by sheer luck. But only just. He could feel the hot ache in his muscles, and the numbing grayness of fatigue poisons in his brain. 2 disadvantages that Death did not have to consider. Death noticed.
"Yield," he said. "I may be merciful."
To illustrate the point, he made a round-arm slash that Mort caught, clumsily on the edge of his sword. The scythe blade bounced up, splintered a glass into 1,000 shards. The Duke of Stow-Hellet clutched at his heart, felt the icy stab of pain, screamed soundlessly and tumbled from his horse. Just turning off the alerts there, that's gonna bug the crap out of me. I'm almost done this book. Yeah, the Duke just died. That's fine. Mort backed away until he felt the roughness of a stone pillar on his neck. Death's glass, with its undauntingly empty bulbs, was a few inches from his head. Death himself wasn't paying much attention. He was looking down thoughtfully as the jagged remains of the Duke's life. Mort yelled and swung his sword up, to the faint cheers of the crowd that had been waiting for him to do this for some time. Even Albert clasped his wrinkled hand. But instead of the tinkle of glasses that Mort had expected, there was nothing. He turned and tried again. The blade passed right through the glass without breaking it. The change in the texture of the air made him bring the sword round and back in time to deflect a vicious downward sweep. Death sprang away in time to dodge Mort's counter-thrust, which was slow and weak.
"Thus it ends, boy."
"Mort," said Mort. He looked up.
"Mort,"
he repeated, and brought the sword up in a stroke that cut the scythe's handle in two. Anger bubbled up inside him. If he was going to die, then at least he'd die with the right name.
"Mort, you bastard!"
he screamed, and propelled himself straight towards the grinning skull, with the sword whirring in a complicated dance of blue light. Death staggered backwards, laughing, crouching under the rain of furious strokes that sliced the scythe handles into more pieces. Mort circled him, chopping and thrusting and dully aware, even through the red mist of fury, that Death was following his every move, holding the orphan's scythe blade like a sword. There was no opening, and the motor of his anger wouldn't last. You'll never beat him, he told himself. The best we can do is hold him off for a while, and losing is probably better than winning. Who needs eternity anyway? Through the curtain of his fatigue, he saw Death unfold the length of his bones and bring his blade around in a slow, leisurely arc as though it was nothing through treacle. "Father!" said Isabel. Death turned his head. Perhaps Mort's mind welcomed the prospect of the life to come, but his body, which maybe felt it had most to lose in this deal, objected. It brought his sword arm up in one unstoppable stroke that flicked Death's blade from his hand and then pinned him against the nearest pillar. In the sudden hush, Mort realized he could no longer hear an intrusive little noise that had been just in his threshold of hearing for the last 10 minutes. His eyes darted sideways. The slant of his sand was running out. Strike! Mort raised his sword and looked into the twin blue fires. He lowered the sword. Now! Death's foot lashed out a groin height with its speed that even made Cutwell wince. Mort silently curled into a ball and rolled across the floor. Through his tears he saw Death advancing, scythe blade in one hand, and Mort's own hourglass in the other. He saw Kelly and Isabel swept disdainfully aside as they made a grab for the road. He saw Cutwell, elbowed in the ribs, his candlestick clattering across the tiles. Death stood over him. The tip of the blade hovered in front of Mort's eyes for a moment, and then swept upwards. "You're right. There's no justice. There's just you." Death hesitated, and then slowly lowered the blade. He turned and looked down into Isabel's face. She was shaking with anger.
"Your meaning?"
She glowered up at Death's face. Wait, was that? She glowered up at Death's face, and then her hand swung back and swung around and swung forward and connected with a sound like a dice box. It was nothing like as loud as the silence that followed it. Kelly shut her eyes. Cutwell turned away and put his arms over his head. Death raised a hand to his skull, very slowly. Isabel's chest rose and fell in a manner that should have made Cutwell give up magic for life. Finally, in a voice even more hollow than usual, Death said, "Why?" "You said that to tinker with the fate of one individual could destroy the whole world," said Isabel.
"Yes."
"You meddled with his, and mine." She pointed a trembling finger at the splinters of the glass on the floor. "And those too."
"Well?"
What will the gods demand for that?
From me?
Yes!
Death looked surprised.
The gods can demand nothing of me. Even gods answer to me eventually.
Doesn't seem very fair, does it? Don't the gods bother about justice and mercy? Snapped Isabel, without anyone quite noticing she had picked up the sword.
Death grinned.
I applaud your efforts, he said, but they avail you not. Stand aside.
No!
You must be aware that even love is no defense against me. I am sorry.
Isabel raised the sword.
You're sorry?
Stand aside, I said.
No, you're just being vindictive. It's not fair.
Death bowed his skull for a moment, then looked up with his eyes blazing.
You will do as you are told.
I will not.
You're making this very difficult.
Good.
Death's fingers drummed impatiently on the scythe blade, like a mouse tap-dancing on a tin. He seemed to be thinking. He looked at Isabel standing over Mort, and then turned and looked at the others crouching against a shelf. No, he said eventually.
No, I cannot be bidden. I cannot be forced. I will do only that which I know to be right.
He waved a hand, and the sword whirred out of Isabel's grasp. He made another complicated gesture, and the girl herself was picked up and pressed gently but firmly against the nearest pillar. Mort saw the Dark Reaper advance on him, blade swinging back for the final stroke. He stood over the boy.
You don't know how sorry this makes me, he said.
Mort pulled himself up to his elbows.
I'm Matt,
he said. Death gave him a surprised look for several seconds, and then started to laugh. The sound bounced eerily around the room. Ringing off the shelves is Death, still laughing like an earthquake in a graveyard, held Mort's own glass in front of its owner's eyes. Mort tried to focus. He saw the last grain of sand skid down the glossy surface, teeter on the edge, and then drop, tumbling in slow motion towards the bottom. Candlelight flickered off its tiny silica facets, and it spun gently downward. It landed soundlessly, throwing up a tiny crater. The light in Death's eyes flared until it filled Mort's vision, and the sound of his laughter rattled the universe. And then Death turned the hourglass over. Once again, the great hall of Stolat was brilliant with candlelight and loud with music. As the guests flocked down the steps and descended on the cold buffet, the master of ceremonies was in non-stop voice, introducing those who, by reason of importance or simply absent-mindedness, had returned up late, as for example, the Royal Recognizer, Master of the Queen's Bedchamber, His Implicitly Igneous Cutwell, Wizard First Grade UU. Cutwell advanced on the royal couple, grinning, a large cigar in one hand. May I kiss the bride? May I kiss the bride, he said. If it's allowed for wizard, said Isabel, offering a cheek. We thought the fireworks were marvelous, said Mort, and I expect they'll soon be able to rebuild the outer wall. No doubt you'll be able to find your way to the food. He's looking a lot better these days, said Isabel behind her fixed grin as Cutwell disappeared into the throng. Certainly, there's a lot to be said for being the only person who doesn't bother to obey the Queen, said Mort, exchanging nods with the passing nobleman. They say he's the real power behind the throne, said Isabel. An eminence something. Eminence Greece, said Mort absently. Notice how he doesn't do any magic these days? Shut up, here he comes. Her Supreme Majesty, Queen Kellerina... Queen Kalerina First, Lord of Storlot, Protector of the 8 Protectorates, and Empress of the long, thin, debated peace hubwards of Stowe Steric. Isabel bobbed. Mort bowed. Kelly beamed at both of them. They couldn't help notice that she had come under some influence that inclined her towards clothes that at least roughly followed her shape, and away from hairstyles that looked like the offspring of a pineapple and a candy floss. She pecked Isabel on the cheek, and then stepped back and looked Mort up and down. "How's Stowe Hillet?" she said. "Fine, fine." Wait, no, that's Mort. "Fine, fine," said Mort. "We'll have to see something about the cellars, though. Your late uncle had some unusual hobbies, and—" "She means you," whispered Isabel. "That's your official name." "I preferred Mort," said Mort. "Such an interesting coat of arms, too," said the Queen. "Cross size on an hourglass rampant against a sable field. It gave the Royal College quite a headache." "It's not that I mind being a duke," said Mort. "It's being married to a duchess that comes as a shock." "You'll get used to it." "I hope not." "Good. And now, Isabel," said Kelly, setting her jaw, "if you are to move in royal circles, there are some people you simply must meet." Isabel gave Mort a despairing look as she was swept away into a crowd and was soon lost to view. Mort ran a finger around the inside of his collar, looking both ways, then darted into a fern-shaded corner near the ends of the buffet where he could have a quiet moment to himself. Behind him, the master of ceremonies cleared his throat. His eyes took on a distant, glazed look. The stealer of souls," he said, in a faraway voice of one whose eyes aren't hearing what his mouth is saying. "Defeater of empires, swallower of oceans, thief of years, the ultimate reality, harvester of mankind, the—"
All right, I can see myself in."
Mort paused with a cold turkey leg halfway to his mouth. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. There was no mistaking that voice, felt rather than heard, or the way in which the air chilled and darkened. The chatter and music of the wedding reception slowed and faded. "We didn't think you'd come," he said to a potted fern.
"To my own daughter's wedding? Anyway, it was the first time I've ever had invitation to anything. It had gold edges and RSVP and everything."
"Yes, but when you weren't at the service—"
"I thought perhaps it would not be entirely appropriate."
"Well, yes, I suppose so."
"To be frank, I thought you were going to marry the princess."
Mort blushed. "We talked about it," he said. "Then we thought, just because you happen to rescue a princess, you shouldn't rush into things."
"Very wise. Too many young women leap into the arms of the first young man to wake them after 100 years' sleep, for example."
"And, well, we thought that all in all, well, once I really got to know Isabel, well—"
Yes, I am sure. An excellent decision. However, I have decided not to interest myself in human affairs any further.
"Really?"
"Except officially, of course. It was clouding my judgment."
A skeletal hand appeared on the edge of Mort's vision and skillfully speared a stuffed egg. Mort spun around. "What happened?" he said. "I've got to know. One minute we were in the lounge room, and the next we were in a field outside the city. And we were really us. I mean, reality had been altered to fit us in. Who did it?"
"I had a word with the gods."
Death looked uncomfortable. "Oh, you did you?" said Mort. Death avoided his gaze.
"Yes."
"I shouldn't think they are very pleased."
"The gods are just. They are also sentimentalists. I have never been able to master it myself. But you aren't free yet. You must see to it that history takes place."
"I know," said Mort. "Uniting the kingdoms and everything."
"You might end up wishing you'd stayed with me."
"I certainly learned a lot," Mort admitted. He put his hand up to his face and absent-mindedly he stroked the 4 thin white scars across his cheek. "But I don't think I was cut out for that sort of work. Look, I'm really sorry."
"I have a present for you."
Death put down his plate of hors d'oeuvres and fumbled in the mysterious recesses of his robe. When his skeletal hand emerged, it was holding a little globe between thumb and forefinger. It was about 3 inches across. It could have been the largest pearl in the world, except that the surface was a moving swirl of complicated silver shapes, forever on the point of resolving themselves into something recognizable, but always managing to avoid it. When Death dropped it into Mort's outstretched palm, it felt surprisingly heavy and slightly warm.
"For you and your lady. A wedding present. A dowry."
"It's beautiful. We thought the silver toast rack was from you."
"That was Albert. I'm afraid he doesn't have much imagination."
Mort turned the globe over and over in his hands. The shapes boiling inside it seemed to respond to his touch, sending little streamers of light arching across the surface towards his fingers.
Is it a pearl? He said.
Yes. When something irritates an oyster and can't be moved, the poor thing coats it with mucus and turns it into a pearl. This is a pearl of a different color. A pearl of reality. All that shiny stuff is congealed, actually. You ought to recognize it. You created it, after all.
Mort tossed it gently from hand to hand.
We will put it with the castle jewels, he said. We haven't got that many.
One day it will be the seed of a new universe.
Mort fumbled the catch, but reached down with the lightning reflexes and caught it before it hit the flagstones.
What?
The pressure of this reality keeps it compressed. There may come a time when the universe ends and reality dies, and then this one will explode, and who knows? Keep it safe. It's a future as well as a present.
Death put his skull on one side.
It's a small thing, he added. You could have had eternity.
I know, said Mort. I've been very lucky.
He put it very carefully on the buffet table between the quail's eggs and the sausage rolls.
There was another thing,
said Death. He reached under his robe again and pulled out an oblong shape, inexpertly wrapped and tied with string.
It's for you, he said, personally. You never showed any interest in it before. Did you think it didn't exist?
Mort unwrapped the packet and realized he was holding a small leather-bound book. On the spine was blocked, in shiny gold leaf, the one word, Mort. He leafed back through the unfilled pages until he found the little trail of ink winding patiently down the page and read, Mort shut the book with a little snap that sounded in the silence like the crack of creation and smiled uneasily.
There's a lot of pages left to fill, he said. How much sand have I got left? Only Isabel said that since you turned the glass over, that means I shall die when I'm...
You have sufficient, said Death coldly. Mathematics isn't all it's cracked up to be.
How do you feel about being invited to christenings?
I think not. I wasn't cut out to be a father, and certainly not a granddad. I haven't got the right to be that kind of knees.
He put down his wine-glass and nodded at Mort.
My regards to your good lady, he said. And now I really must be off.
Are you sure? You're welcome to stay.
It's nice of you to say so, but duty calls.
He extended a bony hand.
You know how it is.
Mort gripped the hand and shook it, ignoring the chill.
Look, he said, if ever you want a few days off, you know, if you like a holiday...
Many thanks for the offer, said Death graciously. I shall think about it, most seriously. And now...
Goodbye, Mort said, and was surprised to find a lump in his throat.
It's such an unpleasant word, isn't it?
Quite so.
Death grinned, because as so often been remarked, he didn't have much option. But possibly he meant it this time.
I prefer au revoir, he said.
The end. Well, that ends Mort. That's a really good book. Yeah. Bit of an age gap between, Isabel and Mort, but, technically, Isabel was in a suspended state of teenagerdom for 35 years, so one could look at it as her not aging. Bit of a complicated thing there. Has she really aged mentally or physically? That's a philosophical mind view. Either way, great book. Gonna read possibly Equal Rights next. Maybe the first two. You don't have to read the Discworld books in order. That's what I'm doing. I just need to find the first Discworld book somewhere. It is around here, and I don't know where it is in my own house. Oh, I'm just gonna wait until my face stops moving. Goodbye.